Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the December 11th, 2019 Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining briefing session. We'll turn the time over to you, Director Baza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome members of the board to your December meeting in Salt Lake City. I'm John Baza, the Director for the division. We're grateful that you're here, and may I wish you all a happy holiday season as we move towards Christmas and the New Year's holiday. Thank you for all that you do for the state of Utah, and we truly appreciate your efforts, and especially that you're here with us today. It's good to see all of you with us. As I begin today, I'd like to start out by introducing a face that's probably familiar to you, and I think several of you met him at the open house last night, but Mr. Bart Kettle. I just want Bart to be recognized. Bart has taken the role of the interim deputy director over the oil and gas program. Bart has had experience with the division since, for the last 15 years anyway. Prior to that, he served with both BLM and Forest Service, the land management agencies. I just wanted to introduce Bart to you and say that you will be seeing him quite a bit more often in the role of the leader of the oil and gas program. And Bart, is there anything you wanted to add to that? Or?
No, I don't have anything to add unless there's questions from the board.
Board members, any questions? Welcome. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bart.
And by the way, Mr. Baza, can I thank you and the rest of your staff and Julianne for the outstanding open house that we had yesterday to meet members of the industries that are represented on the board and our clients of the division. It was an excellent event. And for those of you that came in from out of state to be involved in that, we appreciate your coming and letting us get to know you better. It was a really good time. With that, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item on the briefing agenda today is to give you a briefing on the recent legislative audit of the oil and gas program. As we begin that, I'd like to ask the chair's permission to hand out a set of documents to you. If you'd
Please go ahead.
Okay. Holly Brown is going to hand you what we've been referring to as a media kit, press kit, that has a full copy of the audit on a flash drive included. It has the press release that we issued when the audit was released, and it also includes our response to the audit. I think a few of you as board members have probably seen the printed copy of the audit, but this gives you the full copy of the audit and our response on a flash drive. Holly's business card is also there because as our public information officer, she is fielding the press and public comments that are coming in on the audit, and she put this together, and I think we're pretty proud of it, and we want to make sure that you had a copy of that. As I get into this, I'd like to mention to you that this was a performance audit of the oil and gas program. It was an unscheduled, unrequested audit, but it was part of a 5-year review that the legislative auditors do of all of the agencies. And it started out as a audit of the Department of Natural Resources. And as they surveyed each of the divisions, they looked at some of the things that we had going on in the oil and gas program and said, we think this division needs its own set aside specific audit of what they're doing. And I would say to you that any performance audit will find flaws, will find things that are needed to improve in any agency, and we were no different than that. but as a mentor of mine from many years ago said, if you're looking for imperfection in me, you won't have to look very long. And I think, in fact, the audit did find some things that we needed improvement on. It took a very critical tone, and I think that's something that we're still trying to struggle with. But I think that from my point of view and my reaction and response to the audit was, okay, you've pointed out some things we need to improve. By golly, we're going to improve, and we're going to correct some of those flaws and system inconsistencies that you've pointed out. So I've just got a few talking points about the audit, and I'll answer some questions from you. One of the key ingredients to the audit has to do with finding capability of the division and the board. It criticized us because in 24 years it says we've never issued a fine of the oil and gas industry, of specific non-compliant operators. And as true as that may be, I think we've had other enforcement tools that we've used, and we've actually come in front of this board and obtained approval of, things like causing operators to plug wells, forfeiting bonds that exist. But as it may be, the criticism we got was, you haven't fined anybody. So one of the things that we identified, and our staff has been very good in helping us identify this, is that we think this board should have the authority not only to address and assess fines as they're brought before you, but to collect those fines directly. This occurs in other states, and we think it probably makes sense to do the same thing in Utah. As it sits now, the statute says this board can assess a fine, but in order to collect it, we then have to go through the effort of taking it to civil court to get a judgment against the operator. That's a bit of a lengthy and convoluted process, but we like to streamline that in a way that would result in a greater number of fines being pursued by this board, and if we needed to, go to civil litigation. That civil litigation part would require a significant amount of resources, both from the division and from our legal representation, and legal representation from the operators. So we know that that's a burden to everyone. Allowing this board to collect fines directly, like some of the other Western states are doing, would be more effective and less costly for all parties involved. We will be presenting you with some cases in the very near future of where we would want to go after some fines for non-compliance. But one of the things that this board could help with, and you might consider, is if you would vote for a resolution by this board in favor of the state legislature granting the board the authority which we think is essential. I would be happy to work with you on some draft language for that, but we sent an email out to legislators updating them on the things we were doing in response to the audit, and one of the things we asked for was if parties were interested in pursuing this fine collection capability, please get a hold of us. Now, no one has responded yet, and it's probably only been about a week and a half since we sent that email out. But I think a resolution by this board could be very helpful in that regard of convincing the legislature that that's a good thing to do. So I would, again, be happy to work with you and let you consider that in your own time, but that's one of the things we might find helpful. A second point that I would bring up in relationship to the audit is I really believe that the audit did not give our staff enough credit and recognition for the improvements we've made over the years. If you walk away from this briefing today with nothing else, I want you to walk away with this. The oil and gas program staff is made of talented, hardworking, and dedicated employees. I have appreciated them over many years for not only their knowledge, but their commitment and their integrity. You'll find that as you go through that audit, there was no indication of fraud or abuse taking place by anyone in the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. We've all tried hard to do our jobs and do them to the best of our abilities and knowledge. They, the staff, are taking these audit findings seriously, and we, as a division, are making significant progress because of their efforts. Change is hard. Outside criticism from a third party can be difficult, especially when you feel you're doing the best you can. I believe that as these employees get the support they need from leadership and this board, as they get the additional resources needed to do their jobs, and as we streamline processes, they are ready to take this program to the next level. And I'm extremely grateful for the work that they do in that regard. One more point that I'd like to make is we aren't sitting on our hands or just making promises. We've made progress even since the audit was released. The audit talks about a non-compliance backlog list of 105 items that was identified. That number is now down to 11. 105 to 11, just in the past month or two. Many of these identified issues were a function of database errors that simply needed correction, and those are now cleaned up. In other cases, we are working with those operators to ensure that the follow-up inspections are taking place and the activities that we expected them to accomplish are being done. Another progress point that we've made is that inspection prioritization software in our database have been integrated. In fact, we've been in test mode with our risk assessment model, and the inspectors have started using that, and it's actually helping them get their jobs done better. Inspection decisions are being made accordingly to that risk assessment model, and I think you'll find that that's going to have great bearing on our ability to conduct inspections more effectively, even with the resources we've been given. We're working on updating our bonding administrative statute. It's a situation that was identified in the audit. It says, golly, other states are doing this. You should look at upgrading your bonding requirements. Now, we're prepared to give you an update on what our bond situation is in the near future, early in 2020, and we'll give you that information and allow you to consider potential rulemaking that we would need to improve the bonding status as identified by the audit. We're also working with our human resources group to fill several vacancies in the oil and gas program. We had actually the ability to hire some additional field presence. We've put that out for recruitment for 3 positions. We now have a interview list that we're going to be embarking on to be able to interview those people and get them out in the field and working as quickly as possible. We've updated our database categorization to reflect a fuller version of the compliance process. You know, compliance is not just black or white. It's not binary the way the audit would depict. It's a process. Sometimes operators have to start out slowly, and there's a long period of time between start to finish in compliance. But we want to be able to track that better, and we want it to be noted when an operator is making significant progress on fixing an issue instead of only showing compliant or non-compliant. And that's something that's going to help a great deal. And finally, in terms of the progress we're making progress on all of the commitments. We gave 16 commitments based on the 14 recommendations from the audit, and we've included that as part of our response. We're moving ahead on all of those 16 commitments, and I would just simply ask this board to support us And we'll continue to give you progress reports as we're going to let you know how well we're doing and the success we're achieving in our response to the audit. With that, Mr. Chairman and board members, I'm prepared to ask any question that you might have regarding the legislative audit.
Board members, I'm going to suggest something at the end of your questions about the resolution and how to proceed on that, but at this point, we'll take questions from the board on the audit. On the left? On the right? Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Baza, can you explain how you would envision the board assessing and collecting fines? How would that process work?
This happened before my time when I came to the division in 1997, but I think it was in early 90s where an operator was specifically brought before this board and said they're not performing as required by rule and regulation. And the board actually considered all of the evidence and said, yes, that operator needs to be assessed a penalty for a number of wells that they had which were in non-compliance. I think the penalty that was assessed, it's hard for me to remember, but it was several hundred thousands of dollars. And then after that, this board said, yes, that's the amount of penalty. The Attorney General's office took that to district court, I believe it was in Moab, and argued for a judgment by the court against the operator. And by the time the board's penalty and I guess interest collection or other things that were associated with that assessment were added up, it was well over $1 million of judgment against the operator. Now, the operator never responded, never appeared in district court. But as I understand it, he never conducted business in the state of Utah again. The judgment was issued. It wasn't collected. The operator basically lived somewhere else in the United States, and unfortunately, the judgment, as I understood it, did not extend to being able to collect in other states. But it does create a condition where if that operator or that principal ever returned to the state of Utah, that judgment would still be pending against him. That's the best I understand the process to work.
So just to follow up on that, how would that strengthen or improve the current process? How does the current process differ from that, and where is it weak?
There seems to be a, and I think it was characterized by one legislature that we have a toothless tiger on the prowl here, that if we only have the ability for the board to assess a penalty without collection capability, having to go to district court is just an additional cumbersome step in the process. So we think the board should also be able to collect and somehow render a judgment, but that would have to be corrected by the statutory language that exists.
And board members, pardon me, just so you know, one of the things I'd like to ask you to consider, and this may come up in your questioning, is to have the board's counsel meet with the division and give us enough of a background on this that we can make an informed decision, and also have work with the division to come up with the language of the resolution so that you're not just voting today on something you're not really informed about. So that will be something I'll be asking at the end of this. Okay, next question, Mr. Moon.
So having this ability to assess these fines, is that something before this audit? Is that something that you've talked about and thought this would add something to our arsenal that we need, or is it more audit brought it up, other states are doing it, we better do it?
I think the discussion we had as we were being interviewed by the auditors is we'd like a more direct finding capability. that currently exists by both statute and rule in both of our coal programs and our minerals program. That was the line of response we were giving the auditors. The auditors seemed to feel like we had a finding capability currently in statute for the board, and they wanted to see evidence that we were using the tools we had rather than suggest that there should be major changes to the statute. But this, even asking this board for a fine, the two-step process of having to go to district court to collect creates an obstacle in getting that done effectively. So that's really, we aren't going so far as to say the statute ought to be changed to match what it says in minerals and coal, but we do think that there's a better way to streamline this so we don't have to spend a lot of legal time going to district court and seeking judgment.
Mr. Hanson.
I've got two questions for you, Mr. Boz. One might show my ignorance on this, but have you thought about the range, or is there already a prescribed range of fines, a maximum or a minimum?
The statute allows for a maximum, and I think the maximum is pretty big. It can be, I think, $5,000 a day for a basic penalty, or up to $10,000 a day if it's willful and negligent. But there's, we haven't considered what falls into that spectrum. Even though the maximum is given by statute, we haven't developed a process to say, well, what constitutes a small fine, what constitutes a large fine?
That'll be something that you'll be considering.
Yes.
Where does, again, this might demonstrate my ignorance, but what happens to that fine money collected?
Well, right now in minerals and coal, we have a forfeitures account, and it goes into that forfeitures account, and it can be used for remediating problems, frankly. If
So
needed.
it stays within the division's reach.
Yes.
I have to, guess I need to tell a little bit of a story. And one of my concerns is that not this board and not the division necessarily, but the potential for abuse concerns me a little bit. I think we have to have some fairly tight sideboards on this, because I deal with an agency on a frequent basis that is quite literally out of control. One of our operations received a fine for a cracked toilet seat at one of our portable toilets. I would hate to see something like that become a commonplace, and I don't anticipate it, but down the road, things may change. I'd like to make sure that we have, clear instructions, regulations, policies that say this is deserving, this is not, if we can do that. I've never had that issue with the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining.
Right.
It's a federal agency that we deal with. I don't anticipate we would ever have that problem, but I just want to make sure that we keep that from happening in the future, that we keep the scope well-defined. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Church?
Not being familiar with the adjoining states that have been referred to as having the authority to collect the fines, would you happen to know what the process is in those states on appealing fines? Is their setup similar to Utah's? Do they appeal? Do they have an appeals court that they go to, or?
I suspect there is an appeals process. I think that's considered part of any regulatory due process, but I couldn't tell you for sure. I know in our minerals and coal program, the first level of appeal is to have a informal conference at the division level and say, can we object to the fact of the violation? Can Can we object to the amount of the fine assessed? That would be when fines are assessed at the administrative division level. The process we have for oil and gas says that the board has the authority to assess a fine. So I would assume we'd have to create some ability for that to be appealed somehow and not necessarily do like other board appeals and go straight to the Supreme Court. But there's got to be a way that we can include some appeal process, due process in the language.
Thank you.
Other questions, anyone? Let me make a suggestion to you. The suggestion has, I think, 2 or 3 components. The first one is to ask our attorney to get with the division and to work on getting enough information to us that we're making an informed decision about how it works, where the money goes, how the appeal would work. The second would be the form of a resolution for the board to consider. And the third component of that would be that this would be considered and perhaps so that we can meet the legislative needs of the division, somehow figure out how to get this voted on for our next meeting, which would be basically after the legislature has started. So I don't know how to do that right now, but that would be the 3 parts of what I'd be asking the board to consider. With that, I think it would be important to get a straw vote of how you feel on that in terms of making sure you're informed. Then after that being informed, if you feel the resolution that you're being presented with is appropriate, we'll either vote for favor of it or modify it to the point we can get in favor of it. If we have the votes, and then we would move this along as quickly as possible. Any thoughts on that? Seeing none, I'll make that motion that I just said. Is there a second? There is a second. Is there any discussion? The motion before you is to ask the board council to get with the division and its council to come up with a kind of a fact sheet, white paper on how this works, come up with language for a resolution, and then to move this matter as quickly forward as we can. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record show that was unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Baza.
Thank you.
You proceed to the next issue, please.
I will.
Thank you for that presentation.
Sure. The next item on the briefing agenda is to talk about the proposed board hearing schedule for 2020. That's been distributed to you. I think there have been a number of pieces of dialogue and correspondence with the board secretary on that. The first thing I would mention to you is that the proposed hearing schedule shows that for January, we are meeting on the 5th Wednesday in January, which is the 29th. And then the other issue that came up was a December hearing date. And I think talking to Julianne Carter this morning that we may be settling on December 9th of 2020 for the December hearing date, which would be the 2nd Wednesday in December. We will likely have to do that meeting off-site, but we'll find a compatible arrangement to do that meeting. We'll also be talking well in advance of that meeting about the board's holiday open house for that December date. So with those things in mind, I would just ask the board to consider the hearing schedule for 2020 and give us your ratifying decision as to whether you think that's okay.
Board members, any questions or comments? On the left, it looks like I'm seeing none. On the right? All right, I think, board members, then let's Let's have a vote on that. All those who are in favor of the schedule, or please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record show that was unanimous.
Very well. Under other items, Mr. Chairman and board members, let me just say that this has been a year of ups and downs for the division. I want to wish you the very best of holidays. I hope that you can spend the time with your family and friends gathered around you, and truly appreciate all that we have received in 2019. I'm looking forward to a great 2020. And with that, I'll close my comments and turn the time back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I would like to take the opportunity right now of expressing my feelings toward the division, and I think I speak for the board in how pleased we are with the quality of your staff, the refinements to your process you're continually looking at, your willingness to put yourself at the risk of opinion polls by sending out a questionnaire to your customers on how you're doing, the clarity of the issues as you present them. But I think mostly I'm most appreciative of the integrity that you, John, and I think the rest of your team show. That is a very important thing, and I think the board also wishes you and yours and the rest of the staff a very merry and good holiday season. Board members, anyone else like to add to that? Hear, hear? Well, on behalf of the board, would you join me in a short applause for the division? Thank you very much, Mr. Baza.
Thank you, and I'll turn the time back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, this is the time and place for public comments from the public on matters dealing with our under our jurisdiction. Does anyone have a comment or some questions for the board from the general public? Seeing none, again, we'll thank the division and the board's secretary, Julianne, for the wonderful party yesterday and the open house. That was really appreciated, and everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time. With that, then, we will take a break. I would say that when we do get to the formal hearing, we're going to try to combine the two Wesco matters. And we would ask Altamont Energy if that would prejudice them or hurt them in any way in terms of their timing and flights and things like that. If you could let our council know that would be appreciated. With that, we'll take a break. And we'll be back at 2 o'clock unless there is a way we could get this started earlier. We're not on the record, so would the division be amenable to starting agenda item number 1 early? And I guess the real question is, will we have a court reporter? Okay. And then Rivera Operating. Do we have anyone here that is going to be addressing that? Will your people be available? We will. Okay. And then the matter of Spencer Barton, I doubt he'll be available. Is there anyone else that will be here other than staff and counsel for the division? Wesco, I believe, is represented. Is that right, Mr. McDonald? And Altamont Energy. Well, to the extent we can, let's try to get started at 1:45. Would that And Julianne, would you be kind enough to give us a status report on the court reporter? If she can be here at that time. Thank you. With that, we are having a break, and we'll be back at 1:45. Either way.